This is part 3 of my Master Sword conspiracy theory. If you haven't already watched parts 1 and 2, please go and watch those first. This video will address the biggest evidence against this theory that I've found, the moments in Breath of the Wild that seem to prove that its Master Sword is the same blade as the one found in Skyward Sword and other legends. So let's begin. The biggest problem with this theory that most will point out is Phi. While I have mentioned that it is possible that the ancients replicated Phi in some way, how they could have done that is unknown. If Phi was a construct of the goddess Hylia, surely the ancients couldn't replicate sentient life to imbue into a sword, even if it was artificial, right? Also, Zelda in Breath of the Wild is shown to hear the voice from within the sword, and following the trial of the sword, a chime very similar to Phi's is heard from the blade. While these all seem like proof that it is the same blade, I will do my best to explain how this is all still possible despite the appearance of Phi being present. First, let's remember that disembodied voices are not uncommon in Breath of the Wild. Zelda communicates with Link telepathically, as does Monk Mazkoshia and every other Sheikah monk as well. Even the 4 champions talk to Link without appearing in front of him numerous times. With the DLC, as soon as Link obtains the Master Sword and leaves the forest, he hears a voice telling him to return to the forest for the trial of the sword. It should not be hard to accept that Zelda could also hear disembodied voices, and that the source of it could have been the blade or another source. Furthermore, even if the Sheikah could not create true sentient life for a blade, as the goddess and demon king had previously done, the Sheikah are still able to create artificial intelligence, advanced enough that it can speak as well as any Hylian. The ancient furnace Cherry has an AI interface that is so robotic, it is somewhat comedic. By reading Robbie's memoirs, we learn that this robotic interface was implemented purposefully to save Robbie's marriage. Robbie explains that with the help of his wife, Jaren, the ancient furnace gained the ability to craft ancient gear perfectly and speak beautifully. He claims that Cherry spoke better than any machine he'd ever heard, and that it would have been hard to tell she wasn't a native Hylian. This tells us 2 important things about Sheikah-built AI. First, that it is capable of being nearly indistinguishable from living beings, and second, that it existed. Robbie's claim implies that he has heard other machines that speak but not nearly as well. This is interesting to learn considering that Sheikah technology was banned, buried, and otherwise scattered 10,000 years ago, and largely lost until shortly before the return of Calamity Ganon. At some point in Robbie's long life of studying ancient machinery, he has come across machines capable of speech. It does not appear that guardians or other similar structures can speak, but maybe that is how the Divine Beasts communicated with their champions. Now I'm going to argue that it would make more sense for the greater timeline if this sword's interface was not Phi. The first reason? We don't hear or see Phi ever in Breath of the Wild. In Skyward Sword, Phi is not only heard by Link while in the sword, but is heard and seen by many other characters while manifesting out of the sword. Scrapper, Kikwi, and other Skyloftians see and react to Phi when she appears to Link. Why would it suddenly change that only certain individuals can see or hear Phi? It makes more sense to me that the voice was not Phi, but was instead a voice triggered by Sheikah Tech or Sheikah magic. Either the voice of a fail-safe Sheikah message informing Zelda of the ancient Shrine of Resurrection designed to save the sword's master from certain death, or a disembodied voice of another being telepathically communicating with the princess through magic. The second reason it doesn't make sense for this sword to contain the voice of Phi is that in Phi's final moments, she declares that she is going to enter her sleep in the blade forever, and then is never heard of again in any other game. Why would it suddenly be known that there was a voice in the blade? No other legends of old tell of a voice within the Master Sword. The knowledge of Phi or the voice in the sword likely would have been lost relatively soon after Skyward Sword. It seems more likely that the knowledge of a voice within the blade would have come from newer legends of the remade Master Sword, and that the knowledge of the original voice, Phi, has remained lost to time since the events of Skyward Sword. The only connection of the two voices being that the Sword Monk and the Monk Sages tried to emulate Fi with their blade by giving it a voice or speaking through it themselves. Or perhaps it is imbued with the spirit of another hero as a potential guide for the future heroes. The third and likely biggest reason that this Master Sword wouldn't contain the spirit of Fi is that this Master Sword has been significantly damaged and yet is still around. In Skyward Sword, particularly during the final fights, we learn a lot about the characteristics of a sword spirit and their blade. While yes, there are key differences between Girahim and Fi, we confirm that they both have corporeal humanoid forms and both have tangible blades that their spirit and humanoid form can return into. After Link relentlessly fights Girahim, the Demon King Demise summons the demon blade from within Girahim, and Girahim returns to dwell within his blade just as Fi does. After another sword duel, Demise is defeated. As he struggles to his feet, he thrusts the sword into the earth with a dull clang, and the blade dissolves from his hand and the spirit of Girahim goes with it. If this Master Sword was truly a sword of divine origin containing a sword spirit, wouldn't it make sense in terms of continuity for such great damage to have caused it to dissolve in the same way? More compelling evidence to me that this is the original Master Sword than potential sightings of Fi is that the Deku Tree, who has watched over Hyrule since time immemorial, directly states that is the weapon created by the ancient goddess, the sword that seals the darkness. Why would the wise Earth Spirit, guardian of the forest, lie to you? He has no reason to. But what if he is the victim of the lie himself? According to Google, time immemorial is used to refer to a point of time in the past that was so long ago that people have no knowledge or memory of it. What does that mean for the Deku Tree? He is old. Older than most of recorded history. Interestingly enough, the oldest recorded history for Breath of the Wild is 10,000 years ago, and that appears to mostly be passed through oral tradition, which likely could have been perpetuated and aided from the Deku Tree itself. Is this the same Deku Tree as those found in Ocarina of Time or Windbreaker? Most likely not, considering that both of those games explain that the Deku Trees go through a life cycle, reproducing through seedlings, and are capable of passing away. And neither of those previous Deku Trees resemble a cherry tree as this one does. In fact, the origin of this Deku Tree is actually alluded to in Creating a Champion on page 229. The conceptual backstory for this Deku Tree states, the Master Sword has averted many calamities alongside the hero, and the pedestal that restores the sword from the damage it incurs in those battles is located in Korok Forest, which brims with the energy of the land. Perhaps by design of the goddess, beside the pedestal a single young cherry tree grew. The young tree bathed in the energy flowing throughout the land, and, after an eternity had passed, became the guardian of the blade. How many sacred maidens and heroes opposing countless calamities has this ancient tree witnessed? While this backstory is more of the concept of this Deku Tree and less likely to be established lore, it has some interesting points to think about, with the assumption that most of Hyrule's recorded history may have been preserved and perpetuated by the Deku Tree. That would include its own backstory if it was canonical lore. It, as a young cherry tree, watched the sacred maidens, the heroes, and the sacred blade that is common among all of them as they fought evils and rested between generations. How would it have known any better whether the blade was the same one originally forged by the goddess Hylia? As it watched over the blade, as it repeatedly healed from battle damage, it wouldn't think to question why a sacred holy blade, that never before had shown signs of wear, now had a dedicated place of restoration. It wouldn't have questioned the blade draining the life force of those who would attempt to draw it, nor would it question the great Sheikah-based trial of the sword that certain heroes would have gone through. It would have accepted it all as normal, and the way of the Master Sword, and if you think about it, it wouldn't be out of character for the Sheikah, heavily based on Japanese tradition, to plant a cherry tree near their Master Sword replica. To give the Deku Tree the benefit of the doubt, if a replica was in fact made of the Master Sword, it would likely have been under the direction of Princess Zelda, or at the very least blessed by her divine power. As such, it is not false to claim it was created by the goddess. If the Master Sword in Breath of the Wild is a Sheikah-made Ancient Technology replica of the goddess's Master Sword, what would that mean for the lore of Breath of the Wild? It would easily explain why this Master Sword behaves so differently than all other versions of it, aside from game design differences. It could allow the game to continue to do whatever they need to this Master Sword without risking the overall lore of the Zelda timeline. It could also clear up the prophecy of the return of Calamity Ganon. King Rhoam informs Link, stories of Ganon were passed from generation to generation in the forms of legends and fairy tales. But there was also a prophecy. The signs of a resurrection of Calamity Ganon are clear, and the power to oppose it lies dormant beneath the ground. The Hylians began excavating the ground and eventually came across the ancient technology that had been buried 10,000 years ago. But as we have learned from the game, the divine beasts and guardians were not the power to oppose Calamity Ganon, and for many speedrunners are not needed at all. They were more accurately a power to aid Calamity Ganon. Was the prophecy a lie? King Rhoam, despite heeding the prophecy, forced his daughter to focus on unlocking her sealing power and ignore the ancient technology. There is no evidence that he didn't believe the prophecy, yet he still focused on the two things that historically were proven to oppose the Calamity: the sacred sealing power and the hero wielding the sacred blade. Neither of those two powers appear to lay dormant beneath the ground. Throughout Hyrule, there are many ruins of ancient structures and plenty of secrets to unearth. If this sword is a replica, and has been for thousands of years, the question must be asked: where would the real Master Sword be? Most likely, it would be in an ancient structure like the Forgotten Temple or the Temple of Time, lying dormant beneath the ground. Perhaps the prophecy wasn't a lie, wasn't a trick to provide Ganon with the Guardians, but was misunderstood because no one realized the true Master Sword was still missing. I'm not saying this is a fact. While I have shared specific facts and evidence from the Zelda games, I also shared plenty of speculation and opinions as to what may have occurred to explain this theory. I think this is possible. Do I believe that the sequel to Breath of the Wild will come out and say that this Master Sword is not the true blade? Probably not. But with the new logo for Tears of the Kingdom, the Master Sword is looking like it may be revealing some secrets regarding its connection to the Sheikah or Zonai. Do I think it would be awesome if in the sequel we have to search for the true blade in the Forgotten Temple, or in the past through the Temple of Time? Yes, that would be awesome. I would love if we learned that the Master Sword had to be remade 10,000 years ago because a hero from the future came to claim the sword, that it was or will be brought to the future and could create a nice closed-loop paradox in the timeline. I would love to see Link's new power to travel through solid ground used to enter a chamber in ancient ruins deep beneath the ground that otherwise could never be accessed. And there he sees a blade resembling the damaged Master Sword on his back, standing nobly in a pedestal marked by the Triforce, covered in cobwebs, surrounded by dust and rubble, its guard folded and its power dormant because for thousands of years no sages have prayed over it, and no sacred maiden has blessed it. But I wouldn't bet on it. If I had to bet, the sequel will likely confirm that Fi has continued to reside in the sword, and we will end up reforging it through Zonai magic or some other power. Or it will no longer be needed in the world and will be put to rest forever for a final time. Perhaps the Master Sword is truly the same throughout each legend, but its properties are determined by the pedestal in which it has rested. When pulled from the pedestal of time, it allows the user to travel through time. When pulled from the pedestal of Hylia, it allows for skyward strikes. When placed into sacred spots, it allows for illusory or silent realm travels. And when pulled from Sheikah stones, it allows for Sheikah compatibility. Or maybe the Sheikah learned something about the secrets of the Skyward Sword. In Hero Mode, when the Goddess Blade is first obtained, the game explains, memories of violent battles surge within this sword when you raise it to the sky, and then declares that Skyward Strikes are at maximum strength for Hero Mode. Assuming this is canon, the true Master Sword is powered up with memories of violent battles. Perhaps the Sheikah programmed the Guardians and Divine Beasts with a type of signal that imitates these memories of violent battles for the sword, causing it to glow as it did when once held skyward and increase in power. But before this video ends and you decide if you will dismiss this theory or believe it, let me add one more thing. In promotional material for Breath of the Wild, we learn that this blade has a specific and new name, the Master Sword of Resurrection, a name that pairs it with the Shrine of Resurrection, a new Sheikah structure unique to Breath of the Wild. If this Master Sword was the same as the one in Skyward Sword, it wouldn't need a new title unrelated to holiness. However, if this blade is a Sheikah replica capable of taking physical damage, it would make sense that the Sheikah designed it to enter a slumber of restoration, just as its wielder can in the Shrine of Resurrection, and it would make sense that it informed Zelda of the Shrine of Resurrection which shares its name. Thank you so much for watching part 3 of this conspiracy theory. What do you think? Have I been grasping at straws and overanalyzing how Breath of the Wild chose to implement the Master Sword? Or have I discovered a conspiracy right under our noses the whole time? Are there any other blatant contradictions to this theory that I've missed or ignored? Is there more evidence to support it that I didn't cover? Let me know in the comments what you think. Again, thank you for taking the time to watch this video series. If you don't mind, please consider sharing these videos with your friends who might be interested in this theory.